His name wasn't really Daniel. That's what he told everyone. Daniel arrived in Oak Ridge just before dusk, wearing jeans that didn't quite fit, boots that hadn't yet collected the dust of this town, and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, as if he carried a past too heavy to unpack. He wasn't like the others here. He didn't talk much, didn't smile much, but there was something in his eyes. Something kind, something broken. No one asked where he came from. They just welcomed him like small towns do. Polite nods. Quiet curiosity. And soon enough, someone pointed him to Mick's auto repair. Old Mick needed a hand in Daniel. He needed a place to start over. What no one knew was that Daniel once wore tailored suits, flew in private jets, owned buildings tall enough to touch clouds. But all of it, every last diamond-studded thing, had become meaningless. The night he overheard his whispering on the phone. Of course I don't love him. But do you know how rich he is? And just like that, the glass house shattered. So he vanished, disappeared into his own shadows, shaved his beard, sold his car, deleted everything, arrived in Oak Ridge. A place so quiet you could hear your heart think. On his third day at the shop, she walked in. Her name was Leela. Her car coughed and sputtered like it had been begging for mercy, but it was her eyes that caught Daniel off guard. Not because they sparkled, but because they didn't. They were tired. Beautifully tired. Like someone who'd fought every battle and still woke up to keep going. Lila worked 2 jobs. One at the diner, one at the library. She always smelled faintly of old books and lavender hand soap. "Hey," she said, brushing hair from her face. The engine's making this weird sound like it's growling at me. Daniel smiled for the first time in days. "It's probably hungry," he said softly. Lila laughed, the kind of laugh that starts small but warms the air around it. It wasn't flirtatious. It was real, simple, human. That's how it began. Over the weeks, Daniel fixed Lila's car. Twice. The second time he didn't charge her. She tried to insist. He just shrugged. "I'm not great with money," he lied, "but I'm good with engines." Lila looked at him then. Really looked. "You remind me of someone who used to dream big," she said, "before life got in the way." Daniel didn't reply, but her words echoed long after she'd gone. He started showing up at the diner, sat in the corner, ordered coffee. He never really drank. Watched her float between tables with soft grace. They began talking. Slowly, carefully, not like strangers. More like 2 people who were quietly writing a new chapter and didn't want to scare it away by naming it too soon. One evening, it rained hard, and Leela's shift ended late. Daniel was waiting outside with an old umbrella, standing beside that. Same dusty car he fixed more times than he admitted. "You didn't have to wait," she said, shivering. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." He walked her home that night, the umbrella barely keeping up with the rain. When they reached her porch, she looked at him, eyes wide, vulnerable. "You're kind," she whispered. "I don't know what your story is, but ... you feel safe." In that moment, ... Daniel wanted to tell her everything, but he didn't. Not yet. He was afraid ... that once she saw the bank account behind the man, she wouldn't see him anymore, and so their quiet story continued. Lila made him a scarf one morning, knit. With hands that trembled slightly from tiredness, Daniel gave her a pocket watch, not expensive. Just old and thoughtful. They never kissed. Not yet. But some love stories don't begin with fireworks. Some begin with warm coffee, shared silence, and the sound of someone breathing beside, without needing to say anything at all. But secrets. They don't sleep forever in Daniel's truth. That storm of wealth and betrayal and hidden identity, it was getting closer. The question wasn't if. Lila would find out. ... It was when, and when she did. Would she still see the man in dusty boots, or only the millionaire who had lied? But for now, that's pause here. Let your breath slow again. Let your body feel a little heavier, sinking into your pillow. This story will continue soon, but tonight, you can sleep. Knowing love, even in silence, is still love. Daniel had never felt this way before, not even when he lived in penthouse with glass walls and champagne mornings. That world had glitter, yes, but not warmth, and certainly not Lila. She was the kind of woman, watered dying plants even, and she had nothing left to give. She sang to her dog when she thought no one was listening, and she always left one cookie behind in the jar, just in case someone else needed it more. Daniel watched her in awe. How did someone so fragile-looking carry so much strength? Why? Why did he still feel like he was the one pretending? One Sunday afternoon, they went for a walk. The clouds had cleared, leaving behind golden puddles of light on the pavement. They didn't talk much. Sometimes silence says more. Lila pointed to a bookstore window and said, "One day I'll own something like that. A small place with soft lamps and a cat that sleeps on the counter. Maybe call it Chapter 1, double quotes. Then one day I'll be your first customer." She looked at him, curious. "You don't talk about your past much." His heart skipped, just a beat, but loud enough inside his chest. "There's not much to tell," he whispered. Another lie, but she didn't press. She just nodded and wrapped her scarf tighter. Maybe she understood that some people carry story astire. Still too afraid to read out loud, back at his tiny apartment that night, Daniel stared at the old phone in his drawer. No SIM card, no contacts, just memories. He hadn't spoken to anyone from his real life in months. But tonight, he needed to talk to someone who knew the other version of him. He powered it on. Seconds later, it lit up a flood of missed calls, messages, voicemails. His assistant, his lawyer, his mother. He hesitated, then opened the message from his childhood friend Jonah. "Where the hell are you, man? Everyone's losing their minds. Just tell me you're alive," Daniel typed slowly. Alive. Needed space. Found peace. Don't come looking. He hit send, then turned the phone off again. Back to silence. Back to Oak Ridge. But the universe, as quiet as it may seem, has a way of rustling leaves when you least expect it. The very next day, a sleek black car rolled into Mick's auto. Shop. Way too clean. Way too shiny. Daniel spotted it immediately. It was the kind of car that didn't belong here. Not in a town where rust and rain were normal. The man who stepped out. Jonah, sharp suit city. Energy, eyes wide with relief. "Daniel," he asked cautiously. Or rather, Ryan, his real name. Daniel froze. Mick looked up, confused. "I think you've got the wrong guy," Daniel mumbled. Jonah stared. "Come on, man." "It's me," I said. "You've got the wrong guy." But Lila had walked in, just in time to hear it, and she saw the look between them. That flicker of recognition. She didn't say anything. Not then, but her smile faded, and Daniel's stomach dropped. He felt it begin. The unraveling. Later that evening, she texted him, "Come over, we need to talk." Sat on her porch again, just like the rainy night, except this time, the warmth was gone. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just hollow. Daniel didn't speak right away. The lie he'd lived for months. Shad finally asked for payment. I didn't mean to lie," he said quietly. "But you did." "Yes." She looked away. The silence between them was no longer soft. It stung. "Are you rich?" she asked. "Like, rich? Rich?" Daniel nodded once. I still am, technically." Lila laughed, but it wasn't a joyful sound, so what was I? "A social experiment?" "No," said suddenly desperate. "You were real. The only thing that was real." He stepped forward. "Lila, I left everything because none of it mattered anymore. All I ever wanted was to be seen. Not my money, not my name. Me and you. You saw me." She blinked slowly, and for the first time since he met her, he couldn't read her eyes. "Tonight, let's leave them there, on that porch. Two people standing in the middle of a storm made of truth, where the air feels heavier than before, where words once whispered are now echoes hanging between two hearts. You remember, Lila? And Daniel, or Ryan, as we now know. A truth uncovered. A moment unmasked. She had asked, "Was I just a part of your experiment?" And he had said, "No, You were the only thing that was real. But sometimes, even truth sounds like betrayal when it arrives too late. Lila didn't cry. That almost hurt more. She simply looked at him, as if searching for the man she thought she knew, the one who fixed her car without asking for a dime. The one who walked her home in the rain. Was that man gone? Or had he never existed at all? Daniel stood there, waiting for her to say something. Anything but silence can be louder than yelling, so he nodded slowly. "I'll go," he whispered. And he did. That night, stars looked colder. Oak Ridge felt smaller. Daniel walked back to his apartment alone, his boots scuffing against the pavement, and inside everything felt wrong. The walls, once comfortingly plain, now felt like they were listening. The silence, once peaceful, now buzzed like guilt. He sat on the edge of his bed and thought, maybe she's right to walk away. Maybe I deserve it. But in the quiet corner of his heart, the one Lila had quietly occupied, a small voice whispered, "But you loved her, didn't you?" The next morning, he didn't go to work, didn't go to the diner, didn't even make coffee. He just sat until a soft knock tapped against his door. When he opened it, Lila stood there, not angry, not smiling, just there. "Can we walk?" she asked. He nodded. They walked in silence for a while. Past the empty bookstore, past the willow tree that swayed even when there was no breeze. Finally, she said, "When I met you, I thought you were someone who didn't have much, but had more soul than anyone I knew." Daniel swallowed. The lump in his throat wouldn't leave. "And now?" he asked softly. She looked at him long and deep. "Now, I think you're someone who had everything, but was brave enough to give it up just to be seen for who he truly is." Daniel blinked. Had she just forgiven him? "I was hurt," she said, "because I trusted you, and you didn't trust me with the truth." He nodded. "I was scared," he admitted. "I know," she said, "but love doesn't work without truth." She paused, double quotes, but love also doesn't disappear overnight. They sat under that willow tree, just two people, hearts still bruised, but beating. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Later that week, he told her everything about the empire he'd built, the fiancé who broke him. The night he vanished, Lila listened. No judgment. No pity. Just understanding. And when he was done, she said, "You don't have to go back to that world if you don't want to, but you don't have to hide either." Daniel felt like he could breathe again, fully, freely. Weeks passed. The leaves began to fall, and with each one, something heavy left Daniel's chest. He helped Lila apply for a small business grant under her name. No money from him. She laughed when they finally bought the old bookstore, cried when she hung the sign. Chapter 1. And every morning, Daniel brewed the coffee while Lila opened the curtains to let the sun in. On the first day the shop opened, an old couple came in and asked, "Are you the owner?" Lila smiled. "Yes, but the man behind the counter makes the best coffee in town." Daniel grinned. The man who once wore $1,000? Wachisno wore a faded apron and smelled like cinnamon, and he'd never been happier. But perhaps the most beautiful moment wasn't in the grand gestures. It was quiet. Late one night, after closing the store, they sat on the floor with books stacked around them, and Daniel said, "Thank you, for seeing me." Lila leaned her head on his shoulder. "I always did." Daniel and Lila had found something most people only read about, not in the wealth he left behind, not in the bookstore they built, but in the space between them, where honesty finally had room to breathe. They didn't define what they were. There was no need. Some days they were business partners, sorting through stacks of books, laughing over misprints. Other days, they were quiet companions, reading on opposite ends of the couch, feet touching. In some nights, they were something deeper, closer than names, softer than promises. One morning, the shop opened late, not because of any emergency, but because Lila had decided that they deserved a slow start day. She pulled Daniel outside before sunrise, tossed him a wool scarf, and said, "Come with me." They walked uphill, the kind of hill you don't notice unless you're half awake and haven't had coffee at the top. The view spread out like a painting, the sleepy town below. On the roofs, as dawn quietly arrived, Leela sat on the damp grass. Daniel followed. "This," she said softly, "is what I dreamed of. Not money, just peace. A place where I can exhale." Daniel looked at her. She wasn't dressed up. Her hair was a little wild from the wind, and yet he thought she looked like the most beautiful chapter he'd never deserved to read. "I used to think love was something loud," he murmured. "Big gestures, expensive rings, dramatic stories." He turned toward her. "But now I think love is just this, showing up, choosing the same person, even on the slow, quiet days." Lila smiled. "No need for labels," she said. "No need to rush it. We are who we are, and if that's enough for today, then it's enough." Later that week, Daniel received a letter. The handwriting was neat, familiar. It was from his mother. "My dear boy, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're safe. If you ever want to come home, or if you've found a new one, I hope you know you are still loved." Daniel read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer under the register. He didn't feel ready to write back, not yet, but maybe soon. Winter came early that year. The town blanketed in soft white. Leela started putting warm blankets. On every chair in the bookstore, Daniel installed a tiny fireplace that made the whole place smell like cinnamon and old stories. And as snowflakes drifted outside, the townspeople came in more often, not always to buy, but to sit, to talk, to feel something they couldn't name, Daniel realized. One day he had become a part of this town, not a visitor, not a hidden millionaire, just ... Daniel, the man who brewed coffee and remembered book orders by heart. But even in the quietest towns, life has a way of knocking again. One morning, a journalist came in. She was doing a feature on hidden gems in small towns. She was sweet, curious, but when she looked at Daniel, her brow furrowed. "You look familiar," she said. He froze for half a second, smiled gently. "I get that sometimes." She didn't press, but the encounter lingered in Daniel's mind. That night, he told Leela, "I think someone might recognize me, and if this life we've built gets attention, I don't know if I'm ready to lose it." Lila reached for his hand. "We're not made of glass, Daniel. We won't break." She leaned her forehead against his. "We didn't build our lives out of lies. We built it out of choices, one day at a time." And so, the story continued, through snowstorms, through slow days at the shop, through late nights with cocoa and unread books. They didn't talk much about the past anymore, because the present, the soft-breathing, real present, was finally enough. And somewhere in the back of the shop, on a little wooden shelf labeled "Not for Sale," sat a pocket watch, a scarf, and a photo of two people who didn't find love in the usual places. They found it in the dust, in the ethos in each other, and where two people are writing a life, one silent kindness at a time. Daniel had been living his new life for nearly a year now. Oak Ridge wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It had become home. And Leela, she wasn't just someone he'd met. She had become the anchor in a world he once thought he had lost. Every morning began the same coffee, books, unspoken comfort, but on one particular morning, something felt different. It started with a letter, this time, not handwritten. This one came stamped and sealed. Official, it was addressed to Mr. Daniel Walsh, the name he used now, but the seal on the envelope, it was from one of his former companies. It's the one he once ran. He stared at it for a long while. The past wasn't just knocking. It had walked through the door. Lila noticed she always did. That night, over steaming bowls of soup, she gently asked, "Are you going to open it?" Daniel looked at her, his hands wrapped around the mug like it was holding him together. "I'm afraid," he whispered. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "You don't have to be." She didn't pressure, she never did, but something about the way she said it quietly like a promise, gave him the strength he needed. He opened the letter. It wasn't a lawsuit, it wasn't a scandal, it was a request. We've decided to part ways with our current CEO, if you're willing. The board unanimously hopes you'll return, even in an advisory capacity. Your leadership built this company. Ryan, come home. He sat back, eyes wide, heart heavier than he expected. Come home. But he already was home. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he walked through the quiet bookstore, touching the shelves they'd built by hand, running fingers over the doorframe they'd painted together. This life wasn't made of numbers and contracts. It was made of slow mornings. Lila's laughter, the sound of pages turning in silence. Still, the pull of the past was strong. Not because he missed the power, but because part of him wanted to leave things better than he had. In the morning, he told Lila everything. She listened. Just like always, when he finished, he waited. Waited for her to panic, to ask if he'd leave, to question everything. But she'd instead wait. She took a long sip of her tea, said something he didn't expect, I think. If it's something your heart wants, then you should go. Daniel blinked. But what if I lose this? Lose us? She reached for his hand. You won't. Because what we've built isn't fragile. Daniel, you don't have to hide who you were to be who you are now. Then she added softly, and I didn't fall in love with your money or your name. I fell in love with your heart. Wherever you take it, that's where I'll be. A week later, he traveled to the city, just for a few days. He wore a suit again. Not because he had to, but because it helped him walk into that world with clarity. He declined the CEO offer, but he offered mentorship, support, guidance. And as he spoke in the boardroom, with skyline views and crystal glasses, he felt something, surprising peace. Not because he wanted to stay, but because he finally knew he didn't need to. When he returned to Oak Ridge, Lila was waiting on the bookstore steps, wearing that same threadbare scarf, smiling like sunrise. I made pie, she said simply. Daniel laughed. And in that moment, every doubt melted that evening. As they closed the shop early, lit candles, shared pie and stories, and at one point, without ceremony or plan, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny silver ring. Simple, one lisher. Beautiful, I don't. Need a perfect moment? He said. Just an honest one. Lila looked at the ring, then at him, and whispered, yes. No headlines, no flashbulbs. Just two people who chose each other in the quietest way possible, and as snow danced outside and the fire crackled low, Daniel and Lila sat together on the floor of their bookstore, writing the kind of love story most people only dream of. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel and Lila didn't make a big deal of their engagement. There was no online announcement, no RSVP cards. Just a quiet joy thought made the town glow a little brighter. People noticed, of course they did, but no one asked too many questions. In Oak Ridge, when love finds you, you let it be. The wedding wasn't planned. It just happened. It was a Sunday, the first one in a while, with clear skies and soft wind. Lila had been rearranging the bookshelves again, because spines need breathing room, as she liked to say. Daniel watched her, his heart full and quiet, and then, with hands still dusty from old books, he said, let's do it today. Lila paused, halfway through adjusting a poetry section. Do what? Get married? She looked up. No cake, no dress, no music. He smiled. Just us. She tilted her head, thoughtful. What about flowers? He chuckled. I'll pick some. And so he did. Tiny wildflowers from the back lot behind the bookstore. Purples and whites, and one lonely yellow one swore looked like it was smiling. They borrowed the porch from the baker's house next door. The mayor, who also doubled as the librarian, officiated. Mick from the auto shop brought chairs, and a boy from the diner played a song on a slightly out-of-tune guitar. It was perfect, not because it was grand, but because it was theirs. Daniel didn't wear it. Tuxedo. He wore his favorite flannel shirt. Lila wore a dress she'd sewn herself, not for a wedding, just because she liked how it felt when the wind caught the hem. They said their vows in voices barely above a whisper. but everyone heard. Because the quiet has a way of carrying truth, farther than loudness ever could. I don't promise to be perfect, Daniel said. I promise to be real, to show up, to tell the truth, even when it's hard. Leela looked at him, her eyes shining in that way he had once only dreamed of. And I promise, she said, to see you, all of you, and still choose you, every day. They didn't need rings, but they exchanged them anyway. Simple bands, warm from their pockets. When it was done, the town clapped softly. It's like applause in a dream. And Daniel looked at Lila like he was still learning just how much love the heart could hold that night. The town slept, but the bookstore stayed lit a little longer. Daniel and Leela danced barefoot between the shelves. No music, just the creak of the floorboards, and their laughter echoing softly between the stacks. They shared tea and leftover pie. They curled up under a worn quilt in the couch that had become their favorite place to end the day. And as the fireplace dimmed, Leela whispered, "Do you ever miss it? The other life?" Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I used to think I had everything, but it was all weight, things I carried because I thought they proved something." He turned to her. "But you're not weight. You're the air. I finally learned how to breathe." Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, two hearts rested. No more hiding, no more pretending, just stillness and safety. Daniel and Leela, two souls who found each other not through lightning or chaos, but through stillness, through trust, through choosing each other again and again and again. Spring arrived gently. The snow melted, revealing little green shoots pushing through the soil, small miracles that had waited all winter for their chance. Lala's garden, once just a dream, began to bloom. Lavender, basil, daisies. Daniel had built her a raised bed behind the bookstore. He said it was so the roots could breathe better. She kissed him on the cheek and whispered, "I think it's me who's breathing better now." The bookstore had grown too, not in size, but in heart. People came in just to sit, to sip the coffee Daniel brewed with quiet pride, to listen to the soft jazz playing from a corner speaker, to rest, and sometimes they stayed longer than they meant to. They'd leave saying, "I don't know what it is about this place, but it feels like exhaling." Lila would smile, Daniel would nod, and neither of them would say it aloud. But they knew exactly what it was. Love, quietly living in every corner. Daniel started writing again. Not code. Not memos. Stories. Fiction. Fragments of the people they met. The dreams they dreamed. Sometimes when Leela worked the front desk, he'd be in the back scribbling into a leather journal. She once found a sentence he left open. She loved him not because he was a mystery, but because he was a mirror, showing her how much strength she carried. She never told him she read it, but that night, when they lay in bed, she held him a little tighter. One afternoon, a customer came in with a familiar face. Daniel didn't recognize him at first, but something in the man's voice sparked a memory. "Ryan?" he said, eyes wide. Daniel froze. "No, I'm then." He stopped. He looked at Lila, then back at the man. "Yes," he said quietly, "but I go by Daniel now." The man was from the old life, a former investor, someone who remembered suits, skyscrapers, and champagne rooms. "What are you doing here?" the man asked. Daniel looked around at the sunlight on the wood floor, the smell of old paper and fresh coffee, at Lila arranging a vase behind the counter. "I'm home." Later that night, Daniel sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge like tiny whispers across the sky. Lila came out with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She handed him one, sat beside him and leaned on his shoulder. He told her what happened. She wasn't surprised. She rarely was. "Do you think it'll keep happening?" she asked. "Probably," he said, "but I'm not afraid of being seen anymore." She looked up at him. "I never was." That summer, they hosted a little reading club. Not formal, not fancy. Just a few chairs. Circle. People taking turns reading aloud from dog-eared pages. Lila called it whispers and words. Daniel baked muffins for the group. They weren't very good. Everyone ate them anyway. There was laughter, occasional tears, and something beautiful in the way stories connected strangers, Daniel realized. Something then. He hadn't just built a new life. He had grown one, with roots and branches and blossoms that kept blooming. No matter what the past had once looked like. One night, after everyone had left, and the store was quiet again, Daniel stood by the window, arms around Lila, watching the rain streak the glass. You know, he whispered, if I had never lost everything, I never would have found you. Lila didn't respond with words. She simply pressed her lips gently to his chest, right above his heart, and stood there, still, safe, seen, so now. Dear listener, let your own heart soften. Let the peace of this moment drift through you, like gentle rain on a sleepy rooftop. You are not what the world expects you to be. You are who you choose to become. And like Daniel, like Lila, the bookstore had become more than a place to buy stories. It had become a story of its own. Each corner held a whisper, each window a memory to strangers. It was just a cozy little shop, but for the people of Oak Ridge, it was where they went when they needed a reminder thought life can begin again. Daniel and Lila called it Chapter 1, but everyone in town called it the bookstore of second chances. One afternoon, a girl named Ava came in. She looked about 17, hood up, hands tucked tightly into her sleeves. She wandered the aisles without touching anything. Daniel noticed. He didn't approach, didn't ask questions. Instead, he walked into the back room and returned with a worn copy of The Little Prince. He placed it gently on a stool by the front window. Didn't say a word. Ava stared. Her eyes lingered. And then she sat. She read until closing, and every day after. She came back. Weeks passed before she spoke to either of them. One rainy Thursday, she walked to the counter, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you have anything about starting over? Lila's eyes softened. She didn't ask what Ava meant, didn't press. She just handed her a book, one with a cracked spine and a handwritten note inside. Every broken story has a chapter worth saving. Ava blinked back tears, then nodded, took the book, and stayed for hours. Daniel never asked about her past, but every time she walked in, he made sure there was tea brewing in a seat by the window, because sometimes he understood better than anyone. Silence is a language. 2. Ava wasn't the only one. There were others. A widower who came in just to hear the soft music, a boy who stuttered but read poetry aloud on Tuesdays, a couple who had stopped speaking to each other until they started writing notes back and forth. In the margins of mystery novels, the bookstore welcomed them all, and Daniel realized he hadn't just healed, he'd become a place where others could heal too. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Lila and Daniel sat outside on a wooden bench. Watching the light melt over the rooftops, Lila held a sketchbook in her lap. She wasn't an artist by trade, but her drawings felt like lullabies on paper. She showed him a page. It was the bookstore, but in the drawing, it had wings. Daniel smiled. Is that what you see when you look at it? Lila nodded. It's not just a building. It lifts people, gives them a way out, or a way back in. He kissed the top of her head. You gave me wings too, you know. She smiled, eyes still on the sketch. No, Daniel, you just forgot you had them. Later that night, as they lay in bed, limbs tangled, breath slow, Daniel whispered, Do you ever think about the day we met? Lila chuckled softly. You mean the day my car growled and you told me it was hungry? He laughed. Yes, that one. I remember thinking, she said sleepily, that you looked like a man trying very hard to disappear. He turned toward her, and now. She opened her eyes halfway. Now you look like someone who finally arrived. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to, because the stillness between them was already full of everything they hadn't said. Outside, Oak Ridge slept inside. Peace rested on every windowsill, every book spine, and every corner they had filled. With love So now, let that same peace find you. You don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to fix every page of your story. You just have to breathe and rest and remember. Even broken things can build beautiful homes. Even lost hearts can be found again. And love. Real love is never rushed. It's remembered. Tonight, Daniel had begun rising earlier, not out of necessity, but desire. There was something about watching the town wake up. Birds claiming the rooftops, Lila humming quietly in the kitchen, the bookstore lights flicking on one by one, like stars in reverse. One morning, he found Leela sitting on the floor, surrounded by old journals. "What are those?" he asked, crouching beside her. She held one out, its cover faded and spine taped together. "My grandmother's. I found them in an old box she used to write stories she never showed anyone." Daniel opened one gently. Inside were short passages, half poems, half prayers. One read, "Love isn't found, it's chosen." Again and again and again, even on the hard days, especially then. Allah smiled, watching him read. "Sometimes I think I'm more like her than I realize." Daniel touched her hand. "You're the best parts of her and something entirely your own." Later that day, Leela pinned one of the poems above the counter. Customers began reading it, sometimes pausing in silence, sometimes smiling, sometimes wiping away a tear they didn't expect. It was a little thing, but in Oak Ridge, little things were everything that week. They hosted something new, the Forgotten Writers' Night. People brought in pages they'd never dared to share. Some yellowed with time, others crumpled in backpacks. One man read a letter he never sent to his father. The room was still. No one judged. Everyone listened, and after. There was apple pie, because Lila believed stories should always be followed by something sweet. Daniel watched her work the room, handing out plates, smiling that quiet, knowing smile of hers. And he thought to himself, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever built, and I didn't build it alone. That night, as the last candle flickered, Daniel sat at his desk. He opened his own journal, the one he rarely showed anyone, and he wrote, "There are places in this world where hearts go to. He'll dot, and sometimes if you're lucky, you find someone whose heartles in the same rhythm as yours." He closed the book, kissed Leela's forehead, and crawled under the quilt beside her. Time passed. Not marked by deadlines, but by first snowfalls, new recipes. And the way Ava's voice grew louder with every poem she read aloud, Daniel and Leela didn't chase milestones. They collected moments, a kiss by the river, a letter from a reader across the country, a child giggling in the corner over a picture book. The bookstore had become more than a second chance. It was a beginning that never needed an end. And when the power went out one night during a storm, they lit candles, made toast over the fireplace, and read to each other until the rain grew tired. Lila read from Wuthering Heights. Daniel read from a children's book about a lost duck. They laughed until their cheeks hurt, then fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in each other, while thunder whispered through the trees. So tonight, where kindness has roots, and love blooms slowly like wildflowers through cracked pavement. Leela and Daniel's life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Some mornings were sleepy and sweet, others were quiet and heavy, like hearts learning how to carry each other's shadows. There were bills, and burnt dinners, and thunderstorms that shook the windows. But through it all, they kept showing up. That's how real love grows, not in grand declarations, but in the silent decision to stay, to be soft even when it's hard. One morning, Leela found Daniel outside. Kneeling in the garden with dirt-streaked hands, he looked up at her and smiled. "You're planting something?" "Peonies," he said. My mother, loved them. I thought maybe I'd send her a photo once they bloom." Lila walked over, kneeling beside him. "You ready?" she asked gently. "I think so," he said. "I don't want to hide any more from her, from the past, from myself." She touched his face with her earth-covered fingertips. "I'm proud of you," and Daniel felt it all the way through. He wrote the letter that afternoon. It was short, not dramatic, just real, Mom. "I disappeared because I didn't know who I was without the empire I built. But I found something better than success. I found someone who loves me because I forgot how to pretend. If you ever want to visit, the door's open. There's a bookstore here. You'd love it. He signed it as Daniel, not Ryan, because Daniel was who he'd become when he was finally free to be real. Weeks passed, then a month, no reply, and then one day, a small envelope arrived. Ivory, with elegant handwriting. Leela found him shelving new books when she handed it over. He stared at the envelope for a moment, then opened it. Inside, a single sentence. I would love to see the bookstore. With love, Mom. The visit was quiet. His mother arrived on a Saturday, hair pinned up just like he remembered, but her eyes, softer somehow. Lila welcomed her in. Daniel brewed tea. They sat at the little round table in the corner of the shop. No petty conversations. No accusations, just stories, shared glances, forgiveness not given in words, but in presence. That night, Lila and Daniel stood on the porch watching her walk back to the inn. He exhaled. I thought I lost her forever. Lila leaned into his side. Turns. Out. Love doesn't leave. It waits quietly, like you did for yourself. And slowly, Daniel began to open up to more of the world. A podcast invited him to talk about entrepreneurship. He said yes, not as the man in the suit, but as the man in the bookstore. He spoke not of wealth, but of worth, of how failure sometimes leads you. Home, people listened, and when asked about his success, he simply said, I left the world to find myself. And I found someone who loved the version I didn't know I needed. That evening, Leela wrapped her arms around Haima's. They watched dusk fall across Oak Ridge. You're not hiding anymore? Shh, she whispered. No, he said. I'm living. Let that truth rest in your chest now. Let it melt the tension in your hands, your jaw, your shoulders. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You just have to be true. To you. And like Daniel, you are allowed to rewrite your story, one honest page at a time. Daniel kept her letters in a small, wooden box, behind the register, next to the bookmarks Lila made by hand. The bookstore kept growing, not in size, but in soul. New faces became familiar. Old ones returned. Older still, children who once napped in the reading cornerware, now reading stories to their younger siblings. Every shelf had a secret, every corner, a comfort, and at the heart of it all was Daniel and Lila, the quiet pulse behind the pages. Some mornings, they opened the shop late, not because of appointments, but because they were outside watching the sunrise with warm mugs and colder fingers. They rarely talked during those moments, and they didn't need to, because real love knows when words aren't necessary. One day, Daniel surprised Lila. He'd cleared out the little storage room in the back, the one with creaky floors, forgotten boxes. He hung soft lights, laid down rugs, built shelves from old, repurposed doors. When she stepped inside, she gasped. He handed her a key, engraved with a tiny pressed daisy. What is this? She whispered. Your writing room, he said. It's time the world reads your stories too. Tears filled her eyes. You did all this for me, Daniel smiled. For us, because everything beautiful you've given this place should find. It's way beyond these walls. That night, she began her first novel. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and every page she wrote was stitched with memory. With love, with the quiet bravery of beginning again, Daniel would sit outside the door sometimes, just listening to her type, smiling at the rhythm thought had once been his own. Seasons passed, winters with crackling fires, springs with muddy boots, summers of late-night readings under the stars, autumns with soup shared over slow jazz. Their love deepened, not by changing, but by staying, by choosing the same quiet joy every morning. They woke up together, and sometimes Daniel would still think about the life he once had, not with longing, but with clarity. It had taught him everything he needed to appreciate what he now held gently in both hands. He once had millions. Now, he had peace. and that felt more valuable than anything he'd ever built. One evening, after the last customer left, Daniel and Lila danced in the bookstore. No music, just their own soft humming, her head on his shoulder, his hand in hers. The lights, dim, the world quiet. Just the sound of two hearts beating and rhythming. The middle of the place. They built from nothing. Let that image stay with you now. Let your breath slow. Let your mind drift gently. You don't need all the answers. You don't need all the plans. Just love in its softest form. Love that stays, that listens, that grows older with you. Let yourself rest now. In that kind of love, you've walked with Daniel and Lila through seasons, through silence, through second chances. And now we return to a moment that isn't dramatic, but quietly unforgettable. Lila's book was finished. She placed the final period closed. Her laptop and stared at the blinking cursor for a long while. Daniel was asleep on the couch, a book resting on his chest, glasses slightly crooked. She watched him, his slow breathing, the tiny smile he wore in sleep, as if even his dreams were. Content, she whispered. I wrote us down. And somewhere in his sleep, he turned toward her, as if he heard her. Even without waking, the book was published. The next spring, it wasn't a bestseller, but it found the readers who needed it most. The ones who believed they were too broken, too late, too lost. Readers wrote in with letters full of trembling honesty. This book helped me believe in gentle love again. I thought I'd never heal, and I met your characters. Lila would read them aloud to Daniel in the evenings, and he'd sit there, heart full, thinking this is what happens when you stop pretending to be perfect. Daniel had no desire to return to the old world. He no longer missed the skyscrapers, the silence of big rooms filled with small hearts, because in Oak Ridge, he had found a bigger life, a slower one, a more honest one. He spent his days writing, tending the garden, fixing shelves, and watching people fall back in love with stories. One crisp autumn evening, they closed the shop early. The sun was dipping behind the hills, casting gold on every rooftop. Daniel led Lila out to the back garden. The peonies were gone now, placed by marigolds and sleepy dahlias. He had lit little candles in glass jars, dozens of them. They flickered. Gently as dusk arrived, she raised an eyebrow. What's all this? Daniel took her hand. I never gave you a proper wedding night. No fancy celebration, no dancing under lights. You gave me a bookstore, she smiled. That was more than enough. But tonight, he whispered, just for a while. I want to give you forever. He reached into his pocket hand, pulled out a thin, gold ring engraved inside, with just 2 words, still choosing. Lila looked up at him, eyes glassy, heart wide open. I never stopped. She whispered, they didn't need vows. They didn't need music. They just needed that moment, their foreheads pressed together, their hands warm and woven, the night holding them, and in its arms. And so they danced slow barefoot, surrounded by candlelight and the scent of marigolds. They didn't talk about tomorrow, because when love feels like home, forever lives in every now. Let that stay with you tonight. Let it settle in your chest. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stay too. Choose to be real. Even when you feel small, especially then, let your breath slow now. And know that just like Daniel and Lila, years passed, not like storms, but like rivers, slow and winding. Carving something beautiful with time, Daniel and Lila grew older, but never apart. Their love didn't fade. It deepened into something slower, truer, something that didn't need fireworks space. It had furlush inside the shop. A new shelf had appeared, hand-carved by Daniel, painted by Lila in a shade she called Sunset Hush. It was the memory shelf, books donated by customers, each tagged with a handwritten note. The first book I ever read aloud to someone I loved. I met my best friend on page 42. This book helped me grieve. The shelf stood near the front window. People stopped there first. Some stayed. A while, some cried softly, some left their own notes, and so the bookstore grew again, not in square feet, and in soul. Daniel began writing another book, not a story this time, a memoir, Lila called it Quiet Thunder. He smiled at the title. "That's how you love," she told him, "soft, but it shakes everything." One day, a woman arrived with a child, wide-eyed, curious, full of unasked questions. Daniel recognized the look. They were new in town, starting. Over he gave the boy a book about stars, and a paper bookmark shaped like a moon. Lila leaned down to the woman, her voice soft and steady. "You're safe here." And the woman cried the kind of tears that aren't sad, but relieved, like someone finally found the shore. That evening, Daniel and Lila sat by the fire. Outside, snow whispered across rooftops. Inside, her legs were tucked beneath his arm, resting gently around her shoulders. "I think we did it," Lila said. "Did what?" he asked. "Turned life into a story worth rereading." Daniel kissed the top of her head. With dog-eared pages, he smiled, and hot chocolate stains. They didn't chase milestones anymore. They measured time in tiny joys. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of wind against the window. The way she still reached for his hand in her sleep. One night, during a town gathering, someone asked them, "How do you make love last?" Lila looked at Daniel, then said simply, "By never stopping the story." So now, close your eyes a little heavier. Let the weight of the day fall away. Let your heart be still. You don't have to chase anything. You don't have to fix or prove or perform. You just have to be here, breathing, choosing peace, choosing to begin again, because the best stories are written slowly in love. Is the gentlest author, the bookstore stood quietly. Years after it first opened its doors, time had weathered its wooden sign, softened its paint, but inside, everything felt the same. Warm, safe. Like memory and dream held hands here, Daniel sat at the front window, a wool blanket across his lap, watching the town move gently outside. He wasn't as fast these days, didn't need to be. He spent his mornings brewing coffee, his afternoons napping with a book on his chest, his evenings waiting for Lila to return from the garden. Lila's hair was silver now, soft, and wild like moonlight. She wore the same green sweater she'd had for decades, the one with threadbare, cuff-sand memories sewn into every stitch. She still hummed when she arranged books, still read aloud to the children on little love notes and tucked them into Daniel's jacket pockets. One evening, the sky turned gold again, the kind of gold that only shows up when the day is ready to say goodbye, but still wants to leave you smiling. Daniel reached for her hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I never left the city?" he asked. Lila turned to him, her eyes soft and sure. "You would have found your way here eventually because this was always where you were meant to arrive." They didn't speak for a while after that, just sat side by side listening to the wind move through the trees, watching the town below prepare for night. And in that stillness, in that breath between heartbeats, something deep and wordless settled in. They had lived fully, loved honestly, lost and found and healed all under one roof, and that was enough. A year later, the bookstore had a new caretaker. Her name was Ava, the same girl who once hid in the back, reading the little Princias. If it were the only light left in her world, she'd grown, a stronger, wiser. She kept the same soft chairs, the same quiet music, and the same hand-painted sign outside. Chapter 1: A Bookstore of Second Chances. She didn't change the name because it never stopped being true sometimes. Customers would find a note tucked into a book they hadn't expected to open, written in Daniel's handwriting. "You're not lost. It's just mid-chapter. Be gentle. With your heart, it's been carrying you a long time." Real love always shows up quietly. And, once in a while, when the shop was especially still, Ava swore she could hear soft laughter coming from the back room, as if the story had never really ended. So now, dear listener, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath grows slower, Let yourself believe this, even when the page turns and the cover closes. The story doesn't end. It lives in every choice you make to love again, too. Trust to stay soft. You are not too late. You are not too far gone. You are a chapter in someone's healing. You are a line someone is holding on to you, or the quiet in someone's storm. Let yourself rest now, and know that the most beautiful stories, not the ones with perfect plots, but the ones told gently, page by page, in the company of love. The end. The end.